Reading the Sherwood Ring by Elizabeth Marie Pope. We are picking up on close to the bottom of page 147. We're going to finish this chapter. And at least she isn't your guardian, he pointed out firmly. Do reflect for a moment on the horror of having my Uncle Anthony for one's nearest surviving blood relative. Is he really so bad? I may be doing him an injustice. The first time he saw me, 22 years ago, he informed me that I was the ugliest little rat of a newborn baby he had ever seen in his life, whereupon I instantly tried to stick my finger in his eye. And so we have gone on ever since. The only consolation is that it's so hard to believe he really exists and isn't just some figment of a playwriter's imagination. He roars and flourishes his cane and stamps his gouty foot exactly like one of those tyrant fathers in a very bad comedy. I never see one of his performances that I don't start looking around for an orange girl and wishing for the curtain to come down. Still, I must admit that all things considered, I owe him a good deal. You mean he actually is like a tyrant father in a comedy with a heart of gold hidden under his crusty exterior? Oh no, I was only reflecting that if it had not been for my Uncle Anthony's wretched temper and deplorable lack of self-control, I should not be sitting on the other side of this table enjoying your company at the present moment. What?
Oh.
It's very simple. Uncle Anthony was with the army himself in his younger days before the gout felled him, and he's still in a position to make a considerable nuisance of himself at the War Office. He bought me a commission when these troubles broke out, and he had me shipped off to America with strict orders that I was to be given the hardest and dirtiest post available, preferably one from which I should never return. Tell me, did you or your brother ever happen to wonder why Sir Henry Clinton was so slow to take up and multiply my little organization for discontented loyalists? Dick did wonder often. He thought that possibly Sir Henry was too stupid to understand the merits of the plan. Peaceable laughed softly and a little bitterly. Oh, it wasn't that, Miss Graham. He was perfectly capable of understanding the merits, if it had only been John Andre or some other officer in good standing who presented the plan. But unfortunately, you see, it was my plan, and my uncle has so many friends at court back in England that he'd sooner touch poison. But that simply isn't possible. You can't be serious. Surely, if he's your own uncle, he wouldn't. Why wouldn't he? You live 70 years or more in a place where you own every man and woman and blade of grass for a day's ride in any direction, and then see how you behave when you can't make somebody do what you like. He called me an ill-conditioned lout and an ungrateful young mongrel, and, oh, never mind. The scene went on as it always did, and after a while it ended as it always did too. He started waving his cane and swearing before God he'd break my cursed, stubborn spirit if it killed me. And I started laughing at him and told him he was welcome to try. And so, concluded Peaceable, dismissing the whole subject with a careless wave of his hand, he tried. But why was he so angry with you? What on earth had you done to him? I wouldn't marry the half-wit he'd selected for me. The what? Half-wit. Oh, she didn't bay at the moon, Peaceable admitted grudgingly, or gnash her teeth, or think she was a rabbit. Uncle Anthony gave me to understand that she was very highly regarded in her own circle. But she was the most unutterable fool. She used to say, "Le sir," and giggle, and flutter her fan whenever I spoke to her. All the young ladies you meet do that nowadays. It's the fashion. Precisely what my uncle said to me, to which I replied that if that was the fashion, I'd rather die single. I intend to get married when I meet a young lady as intelligent as I am, and not before. Miss Graham, what are you laughing at? I beg your pardon, I choked apologetically. I know it's rude to laugh, but it was the way you said it, as if you had to do was as if all you had to do was just give her notice of your intentions, and I was only wondering how you'd feel if she had the intelligence to refuse you. She won't, Miss Graham. I'm like my uncle, remarkably set on having my own way.
Oof.
So were all the other Sherwoods, as far back as the family history goes. And we have a motto about it on our coat of arms, which roughly translated from the Latin means, I get what I want.
Oof.
You wait until you meet the young lady, Captain Sherwood. I met her, Miss Graham, this afternoon. He said it quite slowly and casually, without the slightest change in his lazy voice. Indeed, he was not so much as looking at me, but twirling the stem of his wineglass absent-mindedly between his fingers, and staring dreamily at the fire. Unfortunately, however, I knew Peaceable Sherwood fairly well by that time, and his air of elegant heedlessness did not deceive me in the least. You aren't drinking your wine. Let me fetch you some from the dining parlor sideboard. Italian? Father brought it back from Rome. I interrupted him hastily and ran out of the room before he could say anything else. I knew it. I ought to have made him lock me up with Dick in the cellar, I thought, my heart pounding as I fumbled with the door of the dining parlor sideboard. Oh, why didn't I stay at home and learn to flutter my fan like a sensible girl? I got down the Venetian glasses from the corner cabinet and filled them carefully with the Italian wine. Then I reached down the hidden fold of my riding habit for the bottle of Aunt Susanna's headache drops, trying to remember exactly what it was the little apprentice had told me that morning. How many drops had he said it would take to knock a strong man flat? 7, I murmured, breaking the seal on the bottle and turning my head to listen. Across the hall in the library, the tongs clinked faintly as Peaceable Sherwood mended the fire again. Somewhere a long way off in the kitchen, I could hear shouting and the sound of feet stamping happily on the floor. A man with a high, sweet voice was just beginning to sing a plaintive, wailing little tune. It was the old ballad about the girl who lost her lover by her hardness and her cruelty. In Scarlet Town, where I was born, there was a fair maid dwellin', made every youth cry well-a-way. Her name was Barbara Allen. All in the merry month of May, when green buds were swellin'. Get on with it, can't you? I told myself fiercely. The longer you put it off, the worse it will hurt in the end. You were a fool to let him talk to you at all. So slowly, ras she up, and slowly she came nigh him. The voice from the kitchen sang behind me as I put the glasses on the tray and went back across the hall to the library. Peaceable Sherwood was still lounging in his chair and gazing down at the fire. He did not glance up when I entered, nor did he try to return to the interrupted conversation about the intelligent young lady. He simply sat there looking most alarmingly like a man prepared to go on sitting there patiently for years and years, if necessary, until he got what he wanted. "These are the Venetian glasses," I said rather too quickly and nervously, putting one down on the table before him and returning to my own seat with the other. "Father brought them from Italy especially to serve this particular wine. Mine, you see, is shaped like yours, but sea green and decorated with a dolphin instead of a snake. Curious, aren't they?" Peaceable lifted his and regarded it gravely. It shone in his hand like a jewel. The snake curled around the stem, glittering and flickering in the firelight as if it were alive. "Very curious," he agreed with placidity, "and so easy to tell apart. No chance of the wrong person getting the wrong glass, is there?" "No, I suppose there isn't. Don't you think we ought to drink a toast to the new year, or end of the war, or anything you choose?" "Certainly, Miss Graham. And since these are the Venetian glasses, suppose we drink it after the Venetian manner." "What is the Venetian manner, Captain Sherwood?" "This." He moved so quickly that I didn't even realize what had happened until I suddenly found myself staring down at the crimson glass on the table before me, and peaceable Sherwood back in his chair, languidly examining the dolphin curved about the stem of the green one. "In Venice," he explained kindly, "the host and the guest always exchange their glasses before they drink a toast."
He knew.
"I understand the fashion dates from the time of the Renaissance, when one never knew precisely when one might be poisoned."
He knew.
"Pretty custom, isn't it? I have a great liking for pretty customs. They add so much to life." Then, without altering his voice in the least, "What did you put in it, Miss Graham?"
Oh.
"Your Aunt Susanna's headache drops?"
Oh.
"I don't know what you mean," I stammered weakly. "That's very fortunate, Miss Graham. I should hate to see anything happen to you. Would you care to propose the toast now, or shall I?" "Please give me back my own glass, Captain Sherwood, and stop this nonsensical foolery." "But is it nonsensical?" inquired Peaceable, dreamily. "I wonder." "Please, Captain Sherwood, I happen to dislike this particular glass very much. I have an horror of snakes." "Indeed, Miss Graham, I thought of you as a woman with a soul above these trivial superstitions. I tell you, Captain Sherwood," I insisted desperately, "that I did not put poison in your wine. You discourage me, Miss Graham. I told your brother an hour ago that you were a very remarkable young lady. Now I begin to think that you must actually be as foolish and as silly as any other member of your silly, foolish sex. Don't you know that it was very stupid of you to think you could remove that bottle from the pocket of your cloak and conceal it in your riding habit without my knowledge? And that it was even more stupid to inform your brother that the apothecary sold you a sleepy drug only this morning on your way here." He was speaking now very gently and quietly, like a sensible person trying to reason with I gulped bitterly over the word, a half-wit. "And did you really suppose that you could sit there and ask me to believe that there is nothing in that wine but wine? I don't blame you for trying, you understand? It's only the general lack of intelligence that annoys me."
He's whining about it.
"You're wrong," I retorted, but my voice sounded feeble and unconvincing in my own ears. "You're wrong. I'm delighted to hear it, Miss Graham, and I beg your pardon for misjudging you." He bowed to me apologetically across the table. There could unhappily be no doubt that he was enjoying himself very much. I assume that we can now proceed to our toast without further discussion. Since I have your word that there is nothing amiss with your wine, you will of course feel no hesitation about drinking it with me. Or less politely, take that drug and prove yourself a liar. Refuse to take it and prove yourself a liar just the same. I never drink with people who distrust me, Captain Sherwood. But in this case, may I persuade you to break your rule? He leaned forward and pushed the crimson snake into my fingers with a grave courtesy that made me long to pitch it at his face. I propose a toast to my intelligent young lady, if she exists, he added and emptied his glass. To your intelligent young lady, then, Captain Sherwood, I responded calmly and emptied my own. Peaceable Sherwood turned sharply, and we sat looking at one another for a long moment in a stillness so tense that I could hear the logs whispering in the fire, and once again, very faint and far off, laughter and voices from the distant kitchen. A whole chorus was singing now. The lilting words came clear and curiously distinct through the silence. Oh, when I was a young man, I lived to myself, and I worked at the weaver's trade, and the only thing that I ever did wrong was to woo a fair young maid. I wooed her in the winter time, and in the summer too, and the only thing that I ever did wrong was to save her from the foggy dew. Peaceable Sherwood drew a long breath and set down his glass carefully in the exact center of his plate. The only thing that I ever did wrong, he remarked. It was in the green glass all the time, wasn't it? I didn't know how I could get the bottle out of my cloak without your seeing it, I answered, in a voice that was suddenly rather shaky and exhausted. So the only chance was to let you see it, because then you might think it was amusing to pretend you hadn't. You like watching other people make fools of themselves, don't you? And leading them on, and outwitting them, and hanging them with their own rope at the very last minute. I told Dick about the sleeping drops in the cellar just to make certain. Anybody else would simply have taken them away from me, or refused to drink anything at all, or spilt the wine by accident. But not you. That wouldn't have been entertaining enough. I was almost sure you'd get the notion of exchanging those glasses, because it was so much more clever. And I shouldn't attempt to rise if I were you, Captain Sherwood. You'll be unconscious in another moment. But Peaceable had risen already. To this day, I do not know how he did it. Swaying dizzily with one hand clenched over the back of his chair, yet insanely, unbelievably erect and unruffled. A gentleman can hardly continue to sit, he explained in his serenest and most level voice, when he asked a very remarkable young lady to do him the honor of marrying him, and he somehow contrived to grin at me wickedly. I usually get what I want, Miss Graham, he added, and pitched over in a tangled heap on the floor. Then I fear I made a fool of myself. I began to laugh wildly, then I began to cry. Then my head was down on my arms, and I was sobbing and choking and shaking uncontrollably, in a manner that would have disgraced even the most die-away female who said, "La sir," and giggled and fluttered her fan whenever anybody spoke to her. It took a sudden stamping of foot and a wild outbreak of applauding yells from the kitchen to remind me sharply that I was even yet in no position to sit there luxuriating my own tears and hysterics. Hang on, got a picture. The early December twilight was already closing in. Dick was still in the cellar. We were a long 5 miles from the Shipley farm and safety, and at any moment Abram Porson or one of his drunken companions might take it into his head to wander down the hall and glance into the library as he passed. Key, my weary brain insisted as I struggled to my feet. Key. Dick said he had it in his pocket with the other one. All the house keys were in Peaceable's pocket, fastened together on their ring. Dick must have brought them with him and then lost them when he was taken on the previous night. They clashed noisily in my shaking hand when I pulled them out. I tried frantically to keep them with the other hand as I ran down the hall past the closed door of the kitchen. But the tipsy voices inside were roaring the chorus of Foggy, Foggy Dew so loud that I might have driven a coach in 4 up the corridor without attracting the slightest attention. The big kitchen key was still standing in the lock where they had left it, and I risked stopping an instant to turn it very softly before I darted out to the cellar. Dick was sitting on the floor beside a candle stuck in the empty bean pot, whistling, the only thing that I ever did wrong, in harmony with the music upstairs. He came to his feet as he caught sight of me. I put the sleeping drops in his wine, I whispered, fumbling desperately with the locks and the bolts. The rest of them are shut up in the kitchen. And he said the horses were all down in the stable. Oh, hurry, Dick. What are you standing there for? Dick thrust the candle into my hand and turned my head to glance up the stairs. You get down to the stable by the hedge path from the cellar and start saddling up, he whispered back. I'll be with you in a minute or two. Where's Peaceable? In the library, but... Oh, come along, Dick. Please come along. You can't... Do as you're told, said Dick briefly, and was gone up the stairs. It must have stopped snowing while we were still having dinner in the library. Everything was quiet when I opened the cellar door, and there was a glint of clear sky above the feathery drifts clinging to the tall hedges that lined the path. The stable was warm and shadowy and already dark. I put the candle in the lantern and hung it on the nail before I turned to the horses. Most of them looked thin and shabby and rough-coated, as if they had been having hard times lately. The only ones that seemed to be really in good condition were Dick's charger, Gawain, my own mare, and a sturdy little chestnut cob that had apparently come from the Tatlock farm along with the chickens and the ham that morning. Home you go, boy, I told him as he pricked his ears and whickered appealingly at me. This your saddle? Gently now, gently. I suppose you were led astray by bad company. Well, I must admit, it can have a good deal of charm sometimes. A low voice said, All well, Barbara? From the doorway, and I heard Dick's feet on the saddling floor before me, walking slowly, as if he were carrying a heavy load. I turned quickly, and the light from the lantern caught the white upturned face and the limp arm and the patched scarlet sleeve swinging down over his shoulder. Here, come help me with him, he said, panting. We'll have to put him down across the saddle and tie him on somehow, I suppose. You seem to have done a nice, thorough piece of work while you were about it. He probably won't know he's even on earth till morning. Not that I'd really trust Peaceable anywhere short of a cemetery, and then only with a large, heavy monument to hold him down, if you see what I mean. Careful, careful. Steady, that's right. Now bring me some cord out of the cupboard. over there on the left. No, the left. You nitwit. Good. Now keep your hand steady a moment so I can get at the wrist. The thin hand stirred an instant as my own closed around it, and then relaxed helplessly again. "Oh, Dick," I said in an uncertain whisper. "Dick, do you have to?" "Want him sliding off the horse?" grunted Dick, bending down to lash the wrist to the stirrup leather. "No, I didn't. It isn't that. I mean, do you have to take him with us when we go?" "Do we have to?" Dick straightened up abruptly and gave me a look of the liveliest exasperation. "Of course I have to take him with me," he snapped, "and he'd have to do the same to me if he had the chance. You know that as well as I do. What's the matter with you, Barbara? This is a fine time for you to start behaving like a female. I must say, women." He swung himself up on his own horse with a disgusted snarl, and we filed out of the stable and down the drive in silence. The party in the kitchen had apparently not yet discovered that anything was wrong. The fires and lights were still blazing festively behind the drawn curtains as we passed them, and the man with the high, sweet voice had begun to sing Barbara Allen again. The last plaintive, reproachful notes floated lingeringly after us on the clear evening air. "Oh, mother, mother, make my bed. Oh, make it safe and narrow. My love has died for me today. I'll die for him tomorrow." Then the house fell away behind us again, and there was nothing to be heard but the faint jingle of the harness as the horses turned into the orchard road and quickened their pace a little. A handful of winter sunset was burning fierily on the dark edge of the western hills. The sky above it was clear and gold and citron, deepening slowly to a luminous blue that was already pricked with stars. Dick lifted his head and looked at them. "Fair day tomorrow," he said thoughtfully. Then in precisely the same tone, I'd give 10 years of my life to know exactly how this happened." "I told you," I answered rather shortly. I did not feel like talking just then. I put Aunt Susanna's sleeping drops in his wine. "And I suppose that was all there was to it?" retorted Dick. "I said I wanted to know what happened. You may be a very remarkable young lady, my dear sister, as I seem to remember somebody observing in the cellar. But you'll never make me believe that you just poured Aunt Susanna's sleeping drops into Peaceable Sherwood's cup, and he drank them down like a good little boy without any trouble whatever." "I don't know what you'd call trouble. He asked me to marry him, if that's what you mean." "Barbara," said Dick sternly. "Barbara, do you remember what happens to little girls who tell lies? He asked me to marry him." "Not truth and honor." "Truth and honor. He also informed me that he usually got what he wanted." "He did he?" Dick gave a long whistle of amazement and then suddenly began to laugh. I believe that he's supposed to have made the same remark once before, when he tried a perfectly impossible attack on an army outpost late August. One of his men was telling me about it this morning. He said that Peaceable had no more chance of taking that place than he had of flying away to the moon. "Did he take it?" "Oh, yes," said Dick. "I'm sorry for you, Barbara. When's the wedding?"
Oh.
"I think you are behaving in an extremely rude and ungentlemanly manner," I replied with calm dignity. "And besides, how can there possibly be any wedding when he's under lock and key in the Goshen jail?" "I expect you'll find that out," said Dick placidly. Peggy? I glanced up. It was Uncle Enos again, calling to me from the study, and when I looked back, Barbara Graham was gone. Only for an instant, lingering like a cool breath on the heavy summer air, I thought I felt the faintest possible winter tang of Christmas pine and wood smoke. Then a great puff of hot wind came tearing through the west windows and swept it away as the curtains billowed and the study door blew open with a crash. At the same moment, the room darkened suddenly, and there was an ominous, rumbling roar overhead. The long heat of the afternoon was breaking at last in the thunderstorm. "Peggy, where are you?" Uncle Enos was standing at the open window of his study, struggling frantically with the catch. Heavy drops of rain were beginning to splatter all around him. Loose papers and notes were blowing in showers about the floor, and the Venetian glasses on the blotter rocked and tingled perilously in another rumbling gust of wind. The small leather-bound book Uncle Enos had been reading that afternoon slipped from the edge of the desk and fell, carrying a stack of manuscript over with it. I sprang forward to catch the glasses. There was a tremendous roar of thunder, and then the window had slammed shut, and I was down on my knees trying to gather up the scattered papers of the article Uncle Enos was writing for Antiques and Collectors. Uncle Enos paid no attention to me. He was back at the desk examining the Venetian glasses with trembling hands to make sure they had come to no harm. Mercifully, it was all over so quickly that nothing had really been hurt. The sheets of manuscript were out of order, but none was missing, and only 2 appeared to be even slightly blotted by the rain. The small leather-bound book was lying open, face down on the rug, and for a moment I thought the fall must have slipped it apart. But when I picked it up and ran my finger along the spine, it did not seem to be damaged at all. It was a nice little book, very old and smelling faintly of dry paper. Rather to my surprise, there was no title on the spine, not even a few faint traces to show where a title had been once before. It was worn away. Nothing but a coat of arms stamped in faded gold on the center of the front cover, with a "Peggy?" The book was snatched out of my hand, and Uncle Enos stood over me, glaring down, his lips white and his eyes blazing with fury. I had not seen that look on his face since the appalling afternoon when he had driven Pat out of the house almost a month before. "And just what did you think you were doing?" he demanded fiercely. "But Uncle Enos, I was only trying to see. I want it clearly understood here and now," said Uncle Enos, "that I will have no more of this sneaking and spying into my private papers." He thrust the little book into one of the desk drawers, and his hand shaking so much that he could hardly turn the key in the lock. "But Uncle Enos, I was only—" "Go to your room at once," said Uncle Enos, turning his back on me. There were 29 rooms at Rest and Be Thankful, without a soul in any one of them except the study and the kitchen. But Uncle Enos's notion of discipline dated from the days when a naughty child was sent upstairs in disgrace to spend the rest of the afternoon in lonely misery away from his brothers and sisters. "But Uncle Enos, did you hear what I said?" It was obviously useless even to reply. I got to my feet with what dignity I could and trailed away unhappily up the stairs. I went slowly, running one finger absent-mindedly along the polished rail of the banister and frowning to myself. I was trying to remember the exact shape of the coat of arms which had been stamped on the brown leather cover of the little book. The work must have been skillfully done. The gold was slightly rubbed and faded, but even after 100 years or so, the small impression had looked perfectly clear. I could still see it as I had in the single flash before Uncle Enos snatched it away from me. The shield had been blank except for 3 little points that rayed stars clustered in the upper left-hand corner. And under the shield itself was the usual narrow twist of ribbon divided into stiff folds to carry the motto. 3 folds with a word on each. Latin words. Quod something. I shut my eyes for an instant in my effort to concentrate. Excuse the pronunciation. It's Latin. Quod desidero obtenio.
How do you spell it?
I got it.
Okay.
But that isn't possible, I thought, shaking my head as though to untangle it. I can't have remembered properly. What would Uncle Enos be doing with one of Peaceable Sherwood's books? Unless, perhaps... I paused on the landing and glanced speculatively up at the great Copley portrait gleaming down from the wall. After a moment, I even muttered coaxingly, "Did he ever really get what he wanted, Barbara?" But this time, there was not even a whisper or a rustle in reply. The painted hand remained lifted in the way it always was to tuck back the dark curl that was blowing out of the crimson hood, and the painted eyes continued to look over my head in the way they always did, as if they were smiling about some secret of their own.